Hey you, if you're enjoying the podcast, do us a favor and go into your podcast app right now and tap the subscribe button so you never miss another episode. And if you're into reading, go to weirdtruecrime.com to get written versions of the cases we cover on the show, along with extra visual content. All the fun happens on social media, so come talk to us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at our handle @WeirdTrueCrime. And I know it's a giant pain, but it would mean the world to us if you would take 2 minutes to leave us a rating and review. We'll be sure to give you a shout out on future episodes.
Hey, welcome back to Autumn's Oddities. I am Autumn. I'm full of Christmas cheer. If you do celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah, since it was a little bit late this year, or whatever you celebrate, if you don't celebrate anything, I hope that your time was pleasant and as stress-free as it could possibly be. If you traveled, I hope everything went well. I hope you are enjoying your time there. And I hope that you get back home safely if you are away. I also hope that your drunken relatives didn't talk about politics too much or, dig into your personal life or offer unsolicited advice that they have no business offering. Not the case here. I had a great Christmas. Still a little weird. We've had to make some new traditions since my Nana passed away in 2020. She was the matriarch of our family, and it's still a little weird to not have our family gatherings at her house. She was the best cook in the entire world. I will fight you if you say otherwise. I know everybody thinks that their grandmother is the best cook in the whole world. She really, really was. We were all together for the first time in, 3 years. COVID threw a wrench in everything with travel plans. And also, I was very pregnant and did not feel like traveling. We lived in Florida at the time. So it would have been, like a 12-hour drive home, like super, super pregnant. If you've ever been pregnant, it's just extremely uncomfortable to sit for that long. It's not pleasant. But anyway, holiday was great. I'm getting more sentimental with age, and I really like to see my family now. I'm a sappy bitch. Don't tell anyone. It'll be our little secret. Speaking of good, clean fun, I started watching Welcome to Chippendales on Hulu, and I was stunned. I'm sure that we have all heard of the male strip troupe. They were made pretty infamous once Saturday Night Live did that sketch about them, a very famous sketch starring Chris Farley and Patrick Swayze. It's great. Like, they're being super selective of the male dancers, and of course the choice is between Chris Farley or ripped Patrick Swayze. It's a great sketch. But once you have a sketch made about you on Saturday Night Live, you really know that you've made it. But I never even thought about where the concept came from or who the creator was. But the show is fantastic. I highly recommend it. The acting is over the top and phenomenal. And some of the actors in it are some of my favorites. Juliette Lewis, Queen icon, Murray Bartlett from The White Lotus, and Kumail Nanjiani. Fantastic. The show surprised me because I had no clue that the founder of Chippendales was a full-blown wannabe criminal mastermind and, in fact, a murderer. Chippendales founder Steve Banerjee was obsessed with making sure his creation had no competition, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make sure that his male strip show was the only game in town, even if that meant committing murder and arson. Yeah. In the 1980s and 90s, Chippendales made a name for itself in Los Angeles by offering the city's women something that they couldn't get anywhere else: male strippers. Like strip clubs for men, with women dancing were a dime a dozen. They're friggin' everywhere. But male strip shows did not exist. Male stripping has become mainstream after the massive success and national attention that Chippendales gained, with male reviews like Thunder Down Under touring nationally, and the movie Magic Mike drawing huge crowds to theaters, even though it is one of the funniest movies of all time because it is just so bad. Like, I think it's supposed to be kind of a little bit dramatic, the movie, but the acting and writing is so bad that it's kind of comedy. I recommend it. You're gonna laugh. But as with most great ideas, other people wanted to cash in on the success of Banerjee's lightning in a bottle idea with their own male stripping reviews. That was unacceptable to Banerjee and eventually led him to commit unspeakable acts against the very people who helped create his success. This would be a story about the American dream coming true, but more accurately, it is an American nightmare. In 1975, an Indian immigrant named Soman Steve Banerjee, he renamed himself Steve, bought a struggling Los Angeles bar called Destiny 2. Wonder what Destiny 1 was like. He had worked for 15 years as a custodian, then as a gas station attendant. He was a very hard worker, and Steve saved nearly every penny that he earned because he had plans for his life that did not involve working for someone else. He wanted to own his own business, and so that led him to buy Destiny 2. Banerjee opened it up as a discotheque, because it was 1975, and a backgammon hall, which is, yes, a very odd combination, but Banerjee idolized Hugh Hefner, and he was an avid backgammon player. And that gives you a little bit of insight into the mindset of Steve Banerjee. When you realize that his idol was a sleazy, dirty old man. If you have not watched The Secrets of Playboy, oh God, it is rough stuff. It's absolutely devastating and sickening stuff. And we can only call them allegations because, Hugh Hefner is dead. He can't defend himself. He can't be tried for the crimes that many, many, many hundreds, if not thousands of women have alleged against him. But that was this man's idol. Yeah. So Steve wanted nice things. He wanted to be rich. He didn't care how he became rich. He wanted to own a Rolex. He wore suits every day, and he wanted respect, which he, of course, thought was earned by being rich and famous. Banerjee renamed the club Chippendales and began working on generating publicity in and around Los Angeles. But unfortunately, Banerjee was very soft-spoken, so club promotion was not his strong suit, and of course he wanted Chippendales to be upscale and fun. He took the advice of promoter Paul Snider, and if you recognize that name, it's because he's the scumbag who murdered Dorothy Stratton. It's not a strong enough word for him. He was a murderer and a monster and a no-talent, glomming on piece of shit. Not somebody that you would want to hitch your wagon to. I certainly wouldn't, but Steve Banerjee didn't really care how he became successful. Paul convinced Banerjee that he was a big-time club promoter, and of course, because he had Dorothy Stratton, this unbelievably beautiful woman, on his arm, Banerjee believed that Paul had some level of success. And Paul also put on a big front. He drove a black Corvette. He wore a mink coat with a Star of David encrusted with jewels that clung to his chest hair. It glistened in that thick mane. He was called the Jewish pimp, and he cultivated that image, even though really his only claim to fame was discovering Dorothy when she was I'm not gonna cuss. When she was just a child when he discovered her at a skating rink, and he was older than her, and the pervert groomed her. He's disgusting. Was disgusting. Don't rest in peace. Rot in the ground, you dirty bitch. Okay. You'll see why. If you don't know the story of Dorothy Stratton, it's incredibly sad, but I'm not going to speak nicely of this dude. Paul began promoting the club and came up with the idea of male exotic dance night for ladies only in 1979. But Paul was a total bullshitter and he was not successful at all. Of course, he was just riding on the coattails of his beautiful, by that point, wife. Yeah, of course, he tricked her into marrying him, Dorothy. Dorothy was actually the person who came up with the idea of having the Chippendales dancers wear cuffs and collars like the Playboy bunnies did at the clubs, and she even got Hugh Hefner's blessing to do so. What a banner day for old Banerjee. Gross. I hate that joke that I just made. So the idea of a male exotic dance night was a pretty lofty one, as neither Banerjee nor Paul had any experience whatsoever in putting on a show, like making a production. They recruited some random men from, gyms, beaches, and just off the street until they felt like they'd found a good assortment of men, something for every woman. The first strip show was very crude, with many of the men just kind of taking their clothes off like they were about to get into the shower and shaking their business around while still in their socks. They were like stumbling around while pulling off their boots, which we all know is the sexiest thing that anyone could possibly do and immediately makes me want to just shove money into their G-string. That is sarcasm, but it didn't matter. The women absolutely went wild for it, and Chippendales was a hit. And according to Candace Mayron, played by the incomparable Juliette Lewis in the Hulu show Welcome to Chippendales, she was also the former associate producer for the show. She said that it was the first time ever where something was completely geared toward women, and that they built an environment for women to just let it all hang out. And if you think about it, what did exist? I wasn't around during that time, but everything was about men, 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 men. There were strip clubs for men, clubs for men, like men's only clubs, things like that. But there was nothing for women. And if women went to a bar, I mean, even still, if you go to a bar with your friend, even if you're like totally low key, not looking like you're out to, try to get a dude's number, somebody will probably hit on you. Not here, though, because the only men that were allowed were the dancers. Soon there were lines down the block with women waiting to get in, just to watch some dudes shake their nugget pouches at them. Sidebar, I don't like going to male strip clubs. I don't like seeing male strippers. I have been at like a couple of parties where I didn't know there was going to be a male stripper, and I absolutely hate it. I don't like it at all. They like to touch me, and I do not like that. Like, please don't touch me ever. I prefer a female strip club any day. There are rules. They are civilized. But, at the time, the idea of a strip club that catered to women was completely new, and it kind of piggybacked off the women's liberation movement. Women wanted to watch men dance for them in the same way that men got to watch the female strippers dance. It was kind of like an equality thing. They liked that they could objectify the men the same way that men objectify women. Chippendales was soon focused on their female clientele, and that meant more frequent male exotic dance shows. The ladies love the nugget pouches. If there was going to be a show every night, though, the dancers would need to do something more than just take off their boots and shirts to music, They would need to truly entertain their patrons. They needed to put on a real show. Enter Nick DeNoia. Nick came into the club one night with a few female friends because at some point they did open up the club to men in a beyond brilliant idea. So they would have a couple of hours of the male exotic dancing. And when that was over, instead of, the women leaving because the show was over, they decided that the women would stick around if they let some men in. So like at 10 o'clock, I guess the show would start at 8 or something like that. At 10 o'clock, they would have a line down the block with men coming in because there's all these women in here who've just gotten all worked up because they've watched dudes shake it at them for a while. So like every dude in town wanted in. Like, of course they do. It's, very simple, really. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. There's a bunch of horny women inside, and I'm going to come in and be the closer. But, Nick made a beeline one night. He comes into the club with his female friends, makes a beeline for Banerjee, and Nick made it a point to let Banerjee know that there was no production value to his show and that it's tacky and he hates it. Of course, this rubbed big ego Banerjee the wrong way. Massive ego, really no talent. And he believed that every decision that he made was the best one. He did not like a conflicting opinion. But Banerjee did his research on Nick and realized that he was, in fact, a director, screenwriter, choreographer, and a 2-time Emmy Award winner for the show Unicorn Tales, which was a series of 8 musical short films for children. And for about a year, just a little about Nick, he was married to Jennifer O'Neill, who was an actress, model, and activist. So, he was kind of a mover and a shaker. But by bringing in Nick, Paul Snider believed that he had been slighted when Banerjee cut ties with him. Meanwhile, Dorothy was named Playmate of the Year in 1980, and soon Hollywood came calling. She had married Paul, like I mentioned, before she was even 20 years old, and he had been desperately trying to maintain control of Dorothy and her career. But with her new success came professional managers and financial advisors, the things Paul was pretending to be, which, he wasn't anything at all. And this made him very angry because he thought that he was being cut out. Soon, he and Dorothy separated, but Paul was not willing to let her go. On August 14th, 1980, Dorothy went to the house that she used to share with Paul and some friends to negotiate a divorce. The next morning, their friends knocked on the bedroom door and found that it was open. When they went inside, they found the lifeless bodies of Dorothy and Paul. And they said that it looked like a horror movie, like a stage set, like mannequins and fake blood. And they said that they can never, ever get the mental picture out of their head, that it has never gone away. It was an absolutely horrific crime. And police later determined that Snider had raped Dorothy and shot her in the face with a 12-gauge shotgun before turning the gun on himself. And Dorothy Stratton was just 20 years old. After the horrific murder-suicide, Banerjee responds by just pretending that he didn't even know Dorothy and Paul, even though they had been instrumental in his success. Just completely and totally cold-blooded. Banerjee, like I said, he was not a creative person, but he was smart and business savvy. He made it a point to surround himself with creative people, and he wanted Nick DeNoia on the Chippendales team. Nick came on as the choreographer and producer in charge of turning a ragtag strip show into an upscale cabaret production. Dude had his work cut out for him. Nick was described by many of the Chippendales dancer as a person who could get the best performance out of anyone, but that he was not nice about it. He was demanding and he wanted the best that each performer could possibly give, even during rehearsals. Nick recruited some new dancers as well and held tryouts since the first group of men, had literally been recruited at random and they had no technical dance or performing skills whatsoever. Nick wanted a Broadway-style production and he had no patience for amateurs. His tough approach worked and he completely revamped Chippendales. The dancers had heavily choreographed routines with themes as well as individually themed tip and kiss segments. And tip and kiss is exactly what it sounds like. One dancer would perform a solo and then they would go around the audience. And if a woman tipped them, they would kiss her, like French kiss her. That makes me nauseous. One dancer said that he would sometimes kiss 400 women a night. And that's how pandemics and plagues start, children. Good Lord. Oh, no. I'm sorry. I'm sure they made really good money. Me personally, no, I could never do it. But Chippendales became a sensation, and Banerjee and DeNoia clashed very often. Banerjee wanted all of his employees to know that he was the boss, he was in charge at all times, even if it came to things that he did not know anything about, like choreography. They had very different visions creatively, and Banerjee was not willing to let Nick have free reign, even though he was incredibly good at what he did. Banerjee and Nick began to disagree about the future direction of the company. And Steve, really, he cared more about the performer's attractiveness, while Nick was more focused on the show's production value. Banerjee also had an issue with Nick adding black dancers because he thought it would make women feel unsafe. God. He also didn't want to let too many black people into Chippendales. He thought that they weren't upscale enough. Those were his words. Yeah, so he was an immigrant of color who was also racist. He's a real contradiction, a real piece of work. So their differences proved to be just too great, and Nick decided to go to New York to shop around the idea of opening a branch of Chippendales there. At the time, discos and dance clubs in the city were booming, and a male dance revue seemed like the perfect fit. Nick found investors for the club, and then he went ahead and pitched the idea to Banerjee, who reluctantly allowed it, but only because Nick threatened to open a competing dance club if he did not. And of course, like with Nick's talent, it would have been a success. Nick found a huge venue. He built a custom stage, taking Candace Mayron along with him to design and make costumes. And fun fact, Candace is actually credited as the creator of Tearaway Pants. Yeah, she's a genius. Nick flexed his creative muscle, and he even created a rock opera male revue similar to the cabarets in Paris. The New York club was a massive hit, even bigger than the LA location, and the dancers were stars. They had celebrities showing up nightly. People were in formal wear. It was legitimately like going to a Broadway show. Soon, all of the nationally syndicated talk shows featured the Chippendale dancers on their shows, the first being Phil Donahue. Donahue framed what the dancers were doing as performance and art, and so the rest of the country kind of accepted them, and Chippendales became a household name. But something else happened that I think really was the catalyst for the violence that followed. Donahue called Nick Mr. Chippendales, essentially crediting him as being the founder, creator, and the driving force behind the whole show. Of course, that was only half true, but Nick didn't correct him. This set Banerjee into a tailspin because he wanted all of the credit for his creation. He needed the validation. He needed the credit. He needed the pats on the back, and he became insanely jealous. Nick tried to talk Banerjee off the ledge, saying that, I'm not going to stop Bill Donahue in the middle of his show to correct him on national television. Like, who the hell am I? He's Bill Donahue. But Banerjee's ego was just too big to let it go. From then on, out of spite, Nick allowed the numerous talk show hosts who interviewed him to give him credit for creating Chippendales. Yeah, I mean, they were both pretty petty. The two ended their partnership in the late 1980s, striking a deal on the back of a napkin that gave Banerjee control over the Chippendales business, while Nick got the rights to the Chippendales tour and 50% of the profits. So how Nick explained it to him was that, you sit back, you don't have to do anything. I'm going to take this show on the road and you're going to get 50% of whatever we make. And Nick even asked Banerjee, like, do you want to go to your lawyer? Do you want to have them draw up a contract? And Banerjee at the time was already in legal trouble. He was accumulating massive legal debt. He had a huge class action lawsuit against him with, I think, like 13 plaintiffs about racial discrimination. So we're going to veer off a little bit here. The racial discrimination lawsuits, how I said they started letting men into the club? Yeah. So they let men into the club, but at a certain point, like I said, he didn't want too many minorities in there. So he created a VIP card, or like a membership card, and he would only give it to wealthy white men. And once these guys that, used to come to Chippendales all the time, they had no problem getting in. They were getting turned away at the door every single time they came. Even if they came like 3 hours early to stand in line, they were being turned away every single time. And the people that were being let in were rich white guys who had a card. So, of course, these guys eventually got wise to it. They filed the suit against him, and Banerjee lost that lawsuit. Yeah. So that's why he didn't want to go to his lawyer at the time. He was already in legal trouble, already racking up legal debt. And again, he had a huge ego and he thought that he was smart enough to handle this. So Nick writes out the contract. Again, he is not an attorney either, but he writes out the contract on a napkin while they're sitting at a restaurant. And it says that Nick has the rights to the Chippendales tour in perpetuity. Well, Steve, English was not his first language. He did not know what the word perpetuity meant. And Nick even asked him, he said, "Do you know what that means?" And of course, big ego just couldn't admit that he did not know what it meant. So he had no idea what it meant. He signed away the rights to the tour in perpetuity. And the napkin deal, as it's known, it seemed like a better deal for Banerjee at the time because there was no Chippendales tour, but that would soon change. Nick started a Chippendales tour and live show under the organization Chippendales Universal, which was increasingly popular in New York City. Nick paid royalties to Banerjee for the right to use the Chippendales name, and the tour went global. It was a massive success, much to the chagrin of Banerjee, who realized that he had given away the rights to the tour on the back of a napkin. He was incredibly bitter about this. He thought that Nick had tricked him, and he resented Nick in the success of the tour, even though it was still technically his company. It was his company name getting out there. Banerjee became dangerously obsessed with protecting his creation's success, and he called it that. He called it my creation all the time, even if it meant resorting to violence. In 1979, he quietly sent a man named Ray Colon, who he had hired to work at the club as a handyman, down to Moody's Disco, which was a rival nightclub that attempted to have Male Exotic Dance Monday. In 1984, so he sent him there to attempt to burn down the building, and it did not burn down. In 1984, he tried to do the same thing at the Red Onion restaurant and bar. So if anybody opened up just one night a week, had a male review, he literally was sending a henchman there to try to burn it down. The tension finally came to a head on April 7th, 1987, when a then unknown gunman walked into Nick DeNoya's Midtown Manhattan office and shot him in the head, killing him. For years, the killer's identity remained a mystery. However, more clues emerged after Steve moved to purchase Nick's touring rights back from the DeNoya family for $1 million. Interesting. Sounds like a motive. With Nick dead, Banerjee had his creation back under his control, but that didn't stop outsiders from trying to capitalize on his success. In the 1980s and 90s, Chippendales began to face competition from other dance troupes, and Banerjee was determined for his business to stay on top. Really, not even on top. He wanted to be the only one. And I'm like, sir, that's what's called a monopoly, and it's not legal. So Adonis, a rival troupe that included former Chippendale dancers, complained to the Office of Fair Trading that Banerjee was demanding contracts from venues banning other groups from performing there for a year. In 1991, an unknown informant identifying themselves as Strawberry called the FBI in Las Vegas and said that Augustin Ralph Angel, or Ray Colon, that was his full name, had hired him to kill employees of Adonis, a rival dance troupe founded by Michael Fullington, who was a former Chippendales dancer and choreographer, and two other Chippendales dancers, Reed Scott and Steve White. Authorities found 46 grams of cyanide, which is enough to kill over 200 people in Ray's house. So they arrested him and charged him with conspiracy and murder for hire. Allegedly, Steve wanted to have Nick killed after his success with the Chippendales tour. So Steve reached out to Ray, who in turn hired Gilberto Rivera Lopez as an accomplice. And Gilberto Rivera Lopez was the one who actually pulled the trigger and shot Nick. But Ray was also at the site of the murder at the Chippendales office in New York, so he was not innocent. Ray eventually decided to help the FBI and, of course, himself after spending 7 months in jail. He admitted that Steve was the one who organized Nick's murder and the attempted ones of the Adonis dancers. The FBI had Ray released from jail, under the guise that he needed treatment for a terminal issue with his kidneys. Ray then tried to get Steve to admit to his crimes on multiple occasions. And of course, he was wearing a wire, but he wasn't successful until he posed as a runaway fugitive overseas and he met with Steve in Zurich, Switzerland. Then old Steve Banerjee admitted to organizing Nick's murder in a hotel room where the FBI was able to record him from the next room. Steve was later arrested in September of 1993. The two other men involved, who I've already talked about, Ray and Lopez, they pled guilty to the charges stemming from the murder to hire plot and agreed to testify against Banerjee in return for reduced sentences. Additionally, according to the U.S. government's sentencing memorandum, Banerjee was also accused of those 3 arson attempts, leading to minor damage at 2 competing bars, Moody's Disco in Santa Monica and the Red Onion Restaurant Bar in Marina del Rey in 1985. He had abandoned the 3rd attempt on a rival bar. Good God. Banerjee pleaded guilty to attempted arson, racketeering, and murder for hire. He accepted a plea bargain that would have seen him serve 26 years in prison and the loss of his share in Chippendales. Not acceptable to him, though, because on October 23rd, 1994, just a few hours before he was due to be sentenced, Banerjee was found dead in his prison cell, having taken his own life, and he was 47 years old. At the time of his death, Banerjee was depressed, but there was no concern that he would take his own life, according to Renard McFadden, who was executive to the warden at the LA Metropolitan Detention Center at the time. Steve Banerjee left behind a son, a daughter, and his wife Irene, who was also the accountant for Chippendales. Unfortunately, very little is known about Irene before her death from breast cancer in February of 2001. In the Hulu show, her involvement is very dramatized. I don't know how much of it is true, how much of it is just for the plot of the show. But they make her seem like maybe she was complicit in a lot of things, but she was never charged with anything. According to the U.S. Sun, before she died, Irene Banerjee sold the Chippendales brand for $2.5 million to a private owner. However, it is not known exactly when the company changed hands. Investors in the early 2000s included former boy band manager Lou Pearlman, massive scumbag, pedophile, disgusting person, and entrepreneur Kevin Dinberg. According to Dinberg's LinkedIn profile, he left his 2 decades-long post at Chippendales as the managing partner in December of 2020. But Chippendales very much still exists today. I did not realize that. And it is billed as a fantastic sex god abs party that will make you lose your damn mind. I want that on my tombstone. A fantastic sex god abs party. It's just that's amazing. That's an amazing title. And the Chippendales have a residency at the Rio All Suite Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. The theater and lounge were specifically built for the Chippendales at a cost of $10 million. Today, the Banerjee family is no longer involved with the Chippendales franchise. However, his son Christian followed in his father's footsteps by establishing Strippendales in 2020, and he also is a stripper there. He was in the documentary that I watched, also, I think it was on Netflix, about all of these crimes, and he was a real piece of work. He did not take accountability for anything his father did whatsoever. Everything was someone else's fault. Nick Denoyes screwed him over. That rat Ray Cologne screwed him over. It's like, well, your father committed those crimes. Ray Cologne just had him say it out loud. It's like, I think you should be mad at your father and not Ray Cologne. Like, I know your father's passed away, but he did a lot of really bad things. He admitted them, and he was supposed to face the consequences for it. And if he hadn't hung himself in prison, when was that? What year was that? I mean, he would have probably been out today. Like, he didn't have to do that. He had 2 children. There was, again, it's the ego. It's unfortunately in terms of Steve Banerjee, I feel like it was just an act of total cowardice, like just not wanting to go to jail. It's like, really, you had 2 kids, just do your time. You would have probably gotten out early and you would be out by now and you could see your children again if they wanted to see you. I think your son probably would have. Woo! So how do we feel? That was a twisty little ride, wasn't it? Did you have any idea there was so much drama at Chippendales? Like you would think there would be a little drama between the dancers, a little jealousy. Who knows? Maybe not. But I had no idea the creator of Chippendales had the person who was the initial choreographer killed or tried to set all these fires or was involved in racketeering. I mean, who even knows what racketeering is? I've read plenty of definitions about it, but I think there are like many, many, many different ways to racketeer. It's one of the weirdest terms. If you're not from the United States, I don't know if that legal term exists in other countries, but it's financial crimes. It's something like laundering is what I think it is. I don't know. I'm not going to delve too deep into it because I don't ever plan on participating in racketeering. Yeah, I mean, it's just incredibly sad, though, that he felt the need to have Nick DeNoia murdered. He was an unbelievable talent. By all accounts, even though he was hard as hell on the people who performed for him, they all said, I watched in that documentary, a lot of the dancers were interviewed and they were asked if they liked Nick DeNoia, and almost all of them said, no, I didn't like him. And then when they were asked about hearing that Nick was dead, every single one of them cried, still to this day, still cried. Like they didn't like him because he was obviously a dick at rehearsals. We've all had a coach like that. If you played a sport, if you dance, if you do whatever, you've had an instructor, a teacher, whatever, who pushes you and you can't stand them because of how hard they push you, but they get the best out of you. And it's probably because you're trying to spite them, but they pull it out of you somehow. And they said that that's what he was, that he was a genius, an absolute creative genius and a once in a lifetime talent. It's just really unfortunate that ego and pride led to his death. Well, thanks for sticking with me on that one. If you like what you hear, you can hear more episodes on Mondays and Fridays on all podcast platforms. On social media, you can find me on Instagram at Autumn's Oddcast, on Facebook at Autumn's Oddities, on Twitter at Autumn's Odd Pod, and on TikTok. Find me somewhere on there. You won't hear me singing because I don't ever sing in front of people. I certainly wouldn't put it on TikTok, but you can see a video of my cat Naja. She's a big old chunk of fur. And once I am no longer, looking crazy, I may put my own face on TikTok, even though I don't like putting my face on a whole lot of stuff. The internet's harsh. It's hard. Well, I hope that you have a happy new year. And thank you for listening. And remember, if it's creepy and weird, you'll find it here.